Hey, everybody. So, I don't know, about 3 years ago, I did an interview with a guy named Pradeep Ilankamarin. And Pradeep is the co founder and CEO of a company called Farmstead, which is a pure play online grocer started in San Francisco about 4 years ago. And it was interesting because he was, focused on a highly edited grocery selection. Um, he was just serving San Francisco and was absolutely persuaded that he could do it faster and cheaper than most stores that he was going to compete with. And I thought recently that it made sense to kind of reconnect with him a little bit and talk about how things are going. I was curious, partially because he's in San Francisco, right? And they've had their issues lately. Plus, the fact the pandemic has ramped up online grocery demand. I was curious how he was dealing with that and how the company was growing and where the company was growing. The good news is I was able to do it via Zoom. I think when we talked 3 years ago, I'm not even sure Zoom existed. No, none of us were really using it. But this time I could connect with them, and I thought you might find the conversation interesting. So enjoy. Pradeep, welcome to Morning Newsbeat. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for
So
having me, Kevin.
it's been, you've been in business around 4 years. It's been 3 years since I first did a piece about you for Morning Newsbeat, creating a pure play online grocery business in the San Francisco area.
Mhm.
I have first two questions. One, you're still in the San Francisco area, so I want to know what it's like out there right now, because we've been reading nothing about horror except horror stories about the fires. And the second question is, how's business?
Well, the fires have been pretty intense. Today, I'm looking out the window. Today is day two of us getting blue skies and clear air. So I'm definitely not going to look at clear air or blue skies the same way again. I'll tell you that. The business has been pretty intense too. So we've been going through the first few weeks of shelter in place, which was incredibly interesting. We saw a almost 6x surge in demand, and we wound up having to move our facilities to a much larger space, but still relatively small compared to other people. And we are now delivering to twice as many people, double the delivery radius.
So explain a little bit about the Farmstead value proposition. What exactly, how are you positioning yourselves as being different?
Well, we're trying to give customers the promise of e-commerce, but actually for grocery. And the promise of e-commerce is usually we're going to get you lower prices than the store. We'll give you delivery to your doorstep, and we won't screw it up. We'll give you fresh produce very consistently. And so far, no one's really pulled this off. And there's been this misconception in online grocery land. In this $1 trillion grocery space, there's only, pre-COVID 5% online adoption because people aren't interested in online grocery. But what COVID proved, and even before was true, was people are extremely interested in online grocery, but no one's really figured out the economics for them to do so when the majority of the country has a weekly budget that they have to meet. Now, when you're trying to not break your $100 a week budget and you're now being asked to spend another $15, $20 on top, how does that work?
Is it a full scale grocery availability in terms of both CPG products and fresh?
That's correct. So we warehouse ourselves. We have a smaller format warehouse, which we call a micro hub. And the new one is about 17,000 square feet right by the airport in San Francisco. It delivers to a over 50-mile radius all across the Bay Area. We deliver to you and to your neighbors at the same time with our delivery drivers, and it's usually multiple 3-hour windows throughout the day, right? With a cutoff that's very short, so you can place an order now, get a delivery in about 3.5 hours, which is extremely attractive.
So you've got a warehouse,
Mhm.
you've got employees, you've got trucks, you've got inventory, and you've got all the associated costs of doing business.
Mhm.
How are you able to keep your prices lower than the store, as you say, as well as deliver on, in terms of delivering in a timely fashion? How are you able to do that?
When we first started, we assumed that we would not be able to do it, first and foremost, because no one has really done it well, right? Like back from Webvan days all the way to now, this concept of a vertically integrated grocer has not really been fleshed out properly. And it wasn't that the operations were very difficult to figure out, though at one period it probably was, but it was more the demand side of things. Customers were not very easy to reach back in the day. They didn't have, little computers in their pockets all the time that they constantly are checking, right? So our opportunity now to drive customers to these kind of solutions is immense. And two, we are now able to leverage data in significantly better ways than we were before, which now allows us to cut the cost of fulfillment by orchestrating everything that needs to happen using data. So for example, supermarkets waste about 35% of their food all in, including their distribution centers. Farmstead wastes about 3 to 4% system wide. And we do that, it's a crazy result. And we do that specifically by predicting how much, for example, basil to keep in stock, so that when you show up tomorrow, Kevin, and you want to buy basil, that we have enough basil to sell you, but not so much expensive perishable basil that it goes out of stock. And we do it across all the products we sell. That's one. Then we have our pickers and packers and our delivery drivers, and they're all using software we've written to cut the cost down, so that not only are we getting better economics than anyone else in this industry, and most of them are deeply in the red per order, but we are actually on the path to break even and beyond in the most expensive market in the country.
How is that different than category management, and how is that different than SKU rationalization and things like that?
It's typically, well, we don't have a buyer in the traditional sense at Farmstead. For example, buyers in most places, they're picking the products. They usually control the demand to a certain extent. We don't do that. We pick the products, but the demand control is actually done with code. And no people are deciding how much to bring in on a particular day. And the SKU selection is curated. We don't carry 30,000 SKUs. We carry a few thousand SKUs, but they're the SKUs that people buy. And we can talk about this topic for hours. But the reality is, as of right now, we are looking at comparable baskets to supermarkets with a tightly curated selection. And this is another thing that not many people have been able to pull off before.
Oh, listen, I thought, and I've written and talked about this on Morning News Beat a lot since the pandemic started. I mean, I'm in Connecticut, and the store in my market that has just continued to just kill it on a daily basis from the worst days of the pandemic was Stu Leonard's, which has 1,200
Right.
items, but they have the 1,200 items that people actually want. And
Right.
yeah, you might need to buy certain things in other places, but they were constantly in stock on almost everything. They had, because their supply chain was simple, and people who came in knew it. I mean, it was very targeted and very focused. So that's really interesting. So when you say micro hub, there's a lot of terms get thrown around these days. There's micro fulfillment centers, there's dark stores, micro hub. Sort through that for me. How are these things different?
Well, taking a step back about e-commerce in general, most e-commerce that doesn't deal with perishable products is done out of bigger warehouses further away from people. A micro hub is a smaller warehouse closer to people, right? And this is especially important in grocery land, because we believe that inevitably this is the long-term model to get the majority of this $1 trillion space online and delivered to in a way that makes money for both the grocer and a pleasant experience for the customer. So the current terms floating around, there is a store, which is your standard grocery store. There is a dark store, which is a standard grocery store that you're not allowed to walk into as a customer, that only does online grocery. There is a MFC, which is a micro fulfillment center, which usually is a store that has some fraction of it carved out for robotics. And it's usually partial robotics that pick non-perishables, and you still pick the perishables by hand. And in theory, you can connect this up to a set of online customers and give them a faster, slightly better experience. And then there's what we're doing, which is a micro hub, which is a little bit adjacent to these three models. We started doing this 4 years ago with the thesis that smaller format locations closer to people that have a tighter selection of SKUs that people will actually buy, plus, most importantly, the technology work that lets us market digitally and attract customers on places like Facebook and Instagram and Nextdoor and Twitter and any other channel that you're normally reading, that gets us a much further place down the road in terms of margin than anyone else has ever seen. So we are targeting a 10 to 15% net, not a 2 to 3% net like the traditional supermarket.
So is a microhub all hand pick? Is it robotics? Is it
Initially, it's handpicked. I think robotics is definitely a viable solution in the long run as more and more demand accrues to any of these locations, and we really start needing to see the effects of scale. But I firmly believe that robotics is not very necessary right now in the initial stages of onboarding offline customers into online customers.
could a micro hub, and there's going about to be there's about to be there is a lot of real estate that's available right now because of
Mhm.
stores going out of business. Could you conceivably put a micro, I mean, could a micro hub exist in a format in a place that used to have a dark store? I mean, there's no or used to have a store, and so instead of operating as a you know what I'm saying is there's a lot
Yep.
of mixing and matching that can be done here.
Yes, you can put them in retail locations, you can put them in light industrial locations, which is what we normally do. We traditionally don't try to put them in big warehouse locations, like the huge warehouses further away, mostly because it has the ripple effect at customers where since it's so far away, you need to batch up a lot more orders than you normally do with a smaller micro hub. And as a result, customers have to place their order ahead of schedule, and then no one really wants to shop with you because you're asking them to do things they normally don't do.
So if and I can remember from our conversation 3 years ago, um, I mean, I think you know you had and I think have broader ambitions than just serving the San Francisco area. Is it been a slower growth uh, trend that you would have expected? Is it, I mean, accelerated obviously now by the pandemic, but
Mhm.
has it just taken kind of longer to work out the kinks in the model?
The model honestly hasn't changed much from the early days of Farmstead. We are still connecting customers directly to our products, digital products. We buy wholesale, we sell retail, we run these micro hubs, we pick and pack ourselves, and our drivers deliver to you and to your neighbors. We've been doing that forever.
Right.
That's still the model that is working. That's the one that's driving the economics. I think the ramifications of thousands of people showing up in a very short period of time demanding something that we never seen demand like that before, that required a refocus back to San Francisco, and that's really what we did. So we paused the Carolinas expansion, which we were working on early in the year, and we were partnering with Alex Lee over there to have them run our supply, and we are going to resume that very shortly, and hopefully we can talk about that soon.
So, in the terms of the deal that you had with Alex Lee, and I remember we wrote something about it on Morning Newsbeat. Um, was that a matter of them basically serving as your kind of your they were doing the buying for you? How did that relationship? Explain that relationship a little bit.
Our friends at Alex Lee already have big depots of food set up as
Right.
distribution centers for their stores and other grocery chains that they work with.
Right.
And we would essentially seamlessly plug in as a partner. So their distribution centers would deliver to our Farmstead branded locations, and we will probably buy a decent amount of our produce and other products from them.
But Farmstead would have had an independent banner, a
That's correct.
virtual banner, but a banner. You would have been seen as a competitor to Lowe's, which is one of its retail banners.
Well, Lowe's is not in Charlotte, but yeah,
Right. Okay.
that's it would not be a competitive relationship. It's really
Okay.
we're partnering with them, right?
Yeah. So it gave them the ability to expand, but virtually.
I think I mean, I can't speak for Alex Lee. I
Right.
think from our perspective, we are looking to expand with strong regional partners, and there is a very strong interest from both sides to drive traffic in Charlotte. And Charlotte is an extremely interesting city, which actually is turning into one of the hotbeds of grocery delivery experimentation somehow. And everyone's kind of focusing in on it, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
So, and now, as I understand it, you're not just building the Farmstead brand, or you're still doing that and looking to grow that, but you're also you're developing what essentially is a side business, a side hustle, in which um, you're actually going to provide your software to retailers that want to develop their own e-commerce solution. Is that right?
Um, Mostly. So we are spending a lot of
I'll settle for
time
mostly. Yeah.
extracting. We're extracting out the Farmstead core infrastructure, making it available to grocers so that they can help make their own economics better internally. I think we've all, as an industry, started to develop a few bad habits about how we deploy capital when it comes to getting online customers activated and retained. So there needs to be a course correction here where enough software is brought to the table where the dynamics that we are seeing, which are very easily applicable to supermarket stores, by the way, are actually available in the wider industry. So and I was doing the math during the first few weeks of shelter in place. There were about 128 million households in the US that were actually at one point looking to place a grocery delivery order because everything was locked down. And of those 128 million households, there were 50,000 stores available to service them, of which each one can do about 100 to 150 orders. So about 7 to 8 million delivery slots per day for 128 million households nationwide. And of course, this isn't evenly distributed. But if you're wondering during shelter in place why you were not able to get a grocery delivery slot anywhere, you would probably assume that you showed up too late.
Yeah.
But the reality is that there were no slots to begin with, which is kind of upsetting, honestly, for someone like me who's entering a space primarily to bring technology and broader access to pretty much the entire country.
So Farmstead then becomes a solution for a company, a retailer that is looking for a software solution to facilitate e-commerce for them, but also wants to maintain its own branding and doesn't want to just turn it over to, I can think of a company, but I won't name it, a company that would then just do all the picking and do all the delivery and take a big chunk, 10 to 20% of the fee.
I think the models are pretty malleable, right? I mean, there are reasons to use companies like that because not only do they give you that experience, they're also bringing incremental demand to the table.
Right.
I think it's a question of what do grocers want to do. I think our approach is not a platform approach where we are picking and packing and we're delivering to your doorstep and we're charging you as the grocer for that. We're charging the customer for that. That's not what we do. What we do is we already are operating a store. Our chain has better economics than anyone in the online grocery industry right now. If you want to get similar economics, reach out to us and we will help you set up systems like what we've set up that you can run your own self, that you probably are trying to do anyway, but we can help you plug in the pieces into ours and get you to a point where your economics are vastly better on all the pieces that really matter. And most importantly, not only can you increase the capacity of each one of your stores for online grocery in this period where online grocery use is exploding, but you can also carve out the path to aggregate more of those customers who are your offline customers are looking to go online and inevitably get them to a point where you're serving more of them in one bigger format warehouse potentially than multiple stores in a 3 to 5 mile radius.
Well, I think all those things are important, but I think the reason it grabbed my attention was because the other thing it allows them to do is get into the e-commerce business while protecting the integrity of their brand and the integrity of their value proposition, which sometimes if some people are making decisions that they feel will expedite the process, but I would argue would also expedite their demise.
I can't speak
you don't
for.
Have to go there. You know what? You don't have to go there. That's how
well, I can't speak for folks' internal strategies, right? From a grocer standpoint, because I'm not a grocer in the traditional sense, and our company doesn't do the things that traditional grocers typically do. We buy and sell product, but that's pretty much where the similarities end, right? What I do know, having done BD for a very long time, is there's probably a bunch of reasons that you and I don't see for making those decisions, and in a particular moment in time, it may be the best possible decision to make. So as of right now, there are options for improving your technology stack to a point where the things that you're already doing in each of these locations are dramatically better in terms of performance and in terms of economics. And that's what we really bring to the table here. And we call it Grocery OS because it's a Grocery OS specifically for stores to start with, but long term will evolve into the OS that powers any fulfillment center that you want to spin up, whether that's a store, a dark store, MFC, or a full-on warehouse.
Well, listen, you know I'm a fan. I have been a fan since we first talked 3 years ago. So I'm going to give you a quick free commercial here. If people want to reach out to you and find out about Grocery OS, how do they do it?
Email groceryos@farmsteadapp.com or pradeep@farmsteadapp.com.
Terrific. Well, they will. There you go. I hope you get lots of email. Well, listen,
Thanks so
thanks
much,
very
Kevin.
much. I hope the fires stay away, and I hope business continues to grow. Thanks for being on Morning Newsbeat.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Appreciate it. Take care.